Museum de Nueva York. Se caracteriza por conducir una curaduría hiperconsciente del contexto en el que se exhibe. Su trabajo es reconocido por abarcar desde la experiencia del visitante de la exposición hasta el diseño de la instalación, la conceptualización del catálogo y la creación de un programa de eventos que complementen el entendimiento de la obra que se exhibe. Actualmente, el Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit presenta United States of Latin America, una colaboración curatorial entre Hoffmann y Pablo León de la Barra que reúne a más de 30 artistas emergentes latinoamericanos. Jens Hoffmann.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thanks for coming. I'm going to talk about one exhibition in particular that is called United States of Latin America. And then it's an exhibition, as you can see here, maybe you can't because it's very small, that closed on January 3rd, so very recently. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this exhibition is obviously because we are here in Latin America, and there were many Latin American artists in the show, also many artists from Mexico. But also, this is an exhibition that is entirely made from the collection of the Cardist Art Foundation. So, and all the works that we worked with in this exhibition come from one particular collection. And often, of course, when you know about art fairs and galleries in the art market, you often wonder what actually happens to a lot of the artwork that is bought, whether that just disappears in people's houses or in storages or basements. And the Cardist Art Foundation makes a big effort to exhibit all the works that they have in their collection. And currently here in Mexico City is an exhibition that is called the Camera of Wonders at the Centro Citibanamex that is also part of the Cardist Art Foundation collection. I'm going to show you actually the PDF of the publication. The publication was supposed to be here with us, but got stuck in customs, so all I've actually got is the PDF. And I took a couple of photographs of the dummy as well as of the cover, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what these colors are about. With the graphic designer, we studied all the different flags of the Latin American countries and composed many new ones. Also, we used all the sort of little elements in the flags that you find in Latin American countries. I'm going to show you this a little bit better here. This here is a composition. This is the actual cover of the book and the front, and you see all the little graphic elements that you find in flags. So it's sort of like a little bit of a Pan-American flag that really unites all the different Latin American countries. The exhibition took place at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit, where I also work as a curator. And it's the beginning of a series of exhibitions that focus on different regions, different places in around the world. This was the first one. The next exhibition that we're going to do there is about art from Southern Africa, not only South Africa, but the entire southern part of Africa. We're planning on doing a show also with work coming out of Eastern Europe. And of course, one of the things is it's always very difficult to make an exhibition that is focusing on a region because you always sort of like run the risk of portraying that region with particular stereotypical ideas that people have about those places, or you only show like a handful of artists and then it's supposed to be understood as a representation of the artistic activities of the city, the country, and so on. Pablo León de la Barra, who is a Mexican curator living in Brazil, was my co-curator on this exhibition, and he also curated very recently a very similar exhibition about art from Latin America at the Guggenheim Museum in New York that is now on view here at the Museum Humex. And I began talking with Pablo about this exhibition sort of like about the same time as he started working on the show for the Guggenheim, but I really wanted to try to take a different position. Let me talk a little bit about the title, United States of Latin America. Of course, as you know, North America, the northern part of America, calls itself United States of America, but of course it's only the northern part. I have a family in Latin America, and they always told me that they think it should be called the United States of North America, which obviously makes much more sense. But the US has sort of like occupied this whole thing. So we created sort of like a little bit of a critique in a humorous way by calling our exhibition the United States of Latin America. But of course, there's been a history of the idea of uniting Latin America in a similar way. In fact, there was a big movement, I guess a Pan-American movement that emerged after the North American Revolutionary War that wanted to bring together the Latin American countries in a similar fashion. So here are these different flags that we created, all with these different colors. And I wanted to show you the exhibition sort of like through the making of a book. Here, these are all the artists that participated in the exhibition. We wanted to also focus on artists that came maybe from countries that are not necessarily always presented in these kind of exhibitions. There's artists also from the Dominican Republic, from Guatemala, and countries like Ecuador that are not necessarily really in the market or at art fairs or in biennials, and sort of like trying to weave a different path through the continent. But of course, there's also artists from Mexico or Brazil or Colombia, from the main sort of bigger countries in Latin America. So we actually started with the checklist. The book starts with looking. Whoops, that's very sensitive. Okay, back. So here we have this conversation between me and Pablo to really talk about why did we call this exhibition United States of Latin America, and it contains a lot of the sort of history that goes into the idea of Pan-Americanism and the critique. So, oh God, here we go. So I want to show you a few of the participating artists, like Pablo Anchinielli, who is an artist who is living in Sao Paulo, but was originally from Buenos Aires. And this is a piece that is made out of paper that is rolled up, and if you can see, or you can read it, it reads, wherever you may be. It sort of like also has an aspect which I liked about sort of like a city sky, that you look at like skyscrapers or different chimneys of factories. Eduardo Aragon, he's actually from, can you help me with this here? I don't know, it sort of like moves around. Maybe I do this. Now we can do it like this. Maybe I just do it like this. Juan Araujo, an artist from Venezuela who lives now in Lisbon, and his whole work is very much about looking at Latin American modernism, particularly design and architecture. Here he looks at an Italian architect who of course made a lot of work also in Venezuela, and he paints the cover of the book. So the whole painting is in fact really modeled after the original book, which is a quite iconic book about the Italian architect. Wait, other way around. Felipe Arturo, he's from Caracas. But let me go forward to show you the actual installation of the exhibition. She's another Mexican artist. Are you familiar with these books? If you're from Mexico, you might have seen them before. They were published in the 70s, and these books were about famous museums that are all around the world, so that people here in Mexico could see what was in the collection of the British Museum or what was in the collection of the Louvre, and like iconic museums all around the world, because people couldn't travel and there was no possibility to look at websites in the 70s. There was a whole arsenal of books made here in Mexico that looked at these different museums, and sort of like, as you can see, almost like you were walking through the museum. And Mariana Castillo de Val has made these pieces where she has drilled into these books, and they kind of become almost like landscapes and sculptures, and they're set up on these very particular pedestals in the center of a space. But you will see that when we come to the installation shots. This is a very beautiful little work by Marcelo Cidade, who is a Brazilian artist. It's just a little mousetrap made out of marble. Nicola Conscuega is a very interesting artist, also from Colombia. It's in an entire series of photographs where he looked at buildings where they removed the signage, and there's just these ghost letters are left on the buildings. This is just like 2 examples of them. But in the series, there's like, I think about 15 photographs where he's found these buildings in Bogota where the signage has been removed, but you can still see it because of the pollution and all the dirt that has sticked onto it. This has also a very nice relationship actually to Detroit, where the exhibition took place, given the situation there where a lot of like the businesses and a lot of the factories had to close, and you had a similar phenomenon where either the signage was just falling off or people had taken it off, and there's a sort of ghost-like presence of a past that no longer exists. Minerva Cuevas, she's also here from Mexico. This is actually a huge wall mural, probably like 5 by 15 meters, and it's a character from Disney. I don't know how you call them here in Mexico. He's in America, he's called Max Stooge. He has a lot of money. He's sort of like really like a kind of humorous caricature of someone like Rockefeller with enormous amounts of wealth. And in the background, you see an indigenous drawing. So it's sort of like this overlay. The piece is actually called America. It's a large wall mural. What is it called? Rico Pato Pato? Okay, you guys know what I'm talking about. This is a piece by Federico Herrero. He's an artist from Costa Rica. This is a work that he did in Sao Paulo that was not in the show, but we selected it for the book, where in Sao Paulo he went and painted an entire facade of a building in blue. And what was very beautiful was that in many different places of high buildings in Sao Paulo, you could actually see his wall painting, which was just really like a monochrome blue wall. Perhaps sort of like trying to find a blue sky that sort of doesn't really exist in Sao Paulo because, again, of the pollution. And but he in Detroit made a completely new mural, especially for our exhibition. He has some works here actually at the fair and a gallery. Valuspa Yapa is an artist from Chile. A lot of her work deals with the dictatorship. Hey, Mark Fox. This is a work that these are the drawings. You can actually see them from both sides. On the front side, and there's about 8 drawings of them. They're all about assassinations of Latin American presidents during the 1970s. And a lot of those assassinations, it was suspected that there was influence of the American government during the 1970s. She made these drawings based on photographs from newspapers, put them in these particular frames that come out of the wall, but you can also walk around them and see them. And on the front, of course, you see a very sort of sharp image, and when you look at it from the back, it's really sort of like a ghost image, sort of almost like trying to camouflage it or hide it. Bruno Lagomarsio is an artist who is originally from Sweden, but is now living mostly in Sao Paulo, and he's made this work which is sort of like an homage to Felix González Torres. It's a stack of posters, and it very much sort of deals with the whole question that the exhibition is revolving around, sort of Latin American identity. And the piece says, and I don't know if you can read it, if you don't know what the South is, it's simply because you are from the North. And so people could just take them with them. He's also made a similar piece like this where people can stamp things in the gallery, whatever they have, books, flyers, or even put the stamps on their skin. But I wanted to move forward and show you Angelo Leonardo is a very interesting artist, very unknown. I met him in Dominican Republic in Santo Domingo. This is a piece where a lot of like household goods that people feel are very precious, like flat screens, blenders, fans, TVs, are put into these cages and then sitting on the floor of the gallery space. So it has this character that you find a lot in Latin American countries where everything is like super protected. And here it's like these household goods that are having these cages on top of them. Mateo Lopez and another artist from Bogota. These are two sculptures. They're both made out of paper, but one is completely covered in charcoal and the other one is completely covered in graphite. They're like about this big. Renata Lucas is an artist from Rio de Janeiro. She made a special piece for the exhibition where she removed the mailbox of the museum so it would actually go straight into the gallery space. So the mailman was instructed for the 4 months of the run of the show to throw all the mail into the new mailbox, so all the mail would fall directly into the gallery space and people could come and see what is the mail that the museum is receiving. They would, occasionally obviously go through it and pick out what was important to them, but it over the course of the show accumulated to an extreme that you could almost not fit any mail in there anymore, mostly like catalogs and promotion things. Nicolas Paris is another artist from Bogota who's made this gigantic installation with light bulbs. And in each light bulbs, there's either characters or words that form different poems and that tell different stories. It's about a space as big as this little room here with hundreds of light bulbs hanging from the ceiling. And some of them have still the ability to shine and others not. So it has this bit of a sort of cabinet of curiosities feeling. It's kind of like very dark, and there's a lot of little animals inside these specially customized light bulbs. Here, sort of like 2 of them together. But I think you will see it later in the installation shots. Amalia Pica, an artist from Argentina, who I got to know through my friend Mark Fox over there. Pablo Rasgado is another artist here from Mexico. It's an interesting series of paintings with where he had wet white canvases hung outside his apartment for different durations, and then they would accumulate the dust and the dirt and the smog of Mexico City. So I think like each one is like a month, 2 months, or 3 months in this series here. Pedro Reyes, another artist from Mexico. This is a series that's called Mutations. It's hundreds of little frames that create different kinds of creatures that you see below. It always starts with like a pear, and then the pear goes into another direction and becomes like an ant or a superhero. It's a very humorous piece. Gabriel Sierra, this is of course a famous Washington apple, and he sliced it and put a $1 note in between, and on the $1 note you also have George Washington's face. This was a piece that we installed very much at the entrance of the exhibition, sort of as an introduction to the show. But I want to go further to the installation shots. This is something else maybe worth mentioning. We invited about 15 writers and curators from Latin America to each pick a certain term that they associate with Latin American identity or stereotypical ideas about Latin America and write a glossary. So from A to Z, you have a glossary here like dictators, exploitation, Havana, gold, folklore, and so on. So like another level of adding to the conversation that began with the exhibition. So here we're going to come into the space, and in the front you actually see some of those Nicolas Paris light bulbs already that I mentioned before. And it's just a huge old warehouse space. It used to be a car showroom facility, and then for many years was just used as a warehouse. And a lot of the old character has been sort of maintained, particularly when you see this, like these old tiled floors. We installed a new lighting system recently, but it's still, like when you think about the Museum of Contemporary Art, it's like nothing like the museum that you would associate normally, like MoCA in LA or in Chicago. It's still much more down and dirty, if you will, the museum there. Sort of very fittingly, I think, for the city of Detroit. So here you see some of the pieces that I was already mentioning before. One of my favorite pieces actually is the one here on the very right. It's a piece that is a frottage of the gravestone of Karl Marx, and also a video of it that where you see on the video the gravestone in Highgate Cemetery, and there's like snakes and worms, and there's like moss growing on, and there's grass all over. So it's really this idea of like a utopian idea that never really got fulfilled, or that is now outdated. But of course it was sort of like for a long time a very important, the Marxist idea was a long time an alternative for a political alternative for Latin America. That's sort of like passé now, and it's over. Here you see another installation shot, and in front is a work by Adriana Lara. These are these chairs that you often find like in tourist shops or like in places where you sell like folkloristic furniture, and she placed them across from each other and had a string attached to them, like this children's game that children play that can make different forms with a string in their fingers. So it was quite an open scenario, and here you see these books by Mariana Castillo de Val that I spoke about before. They were actually sort of like on eye height and had all these holes in them, so you could look through each of the individual pages. This is a mural that I was telling you about before. So quite a large installation, and only the second time that piece was actually installed. As I said before, all these works are coming from the Cardist art collection, and we have collected art from Latin America for probably about 7 to 8 years now. There's about 250 works in the collection. There's many more established artists in the collection that we didn't include in this exhibition because we were sort of like trying to focus more on emerging or younger or lesser known artists. Some of the perhaps better known artists that are also part of the collection would be artists like Francis Alice or Sildo Mireles, Gabriela Roscoe, like sort of more the bigger household names, but obviously it wouldn't make sense in a context like this where you have also quite unknown or sort of very new discoveries. So we really wanted to focus on artists that were lesser known. For example, Nicolas Bacal, he's a younger artist from Argentina who made this piece in the corner. It's a sun that is made out of these measuring tapes, but each measuring tape in itself has all the numbers removed, so it doesn't really function as a measuring tape anymore, and like has this idea of a sun that we placed in the corner. As I said, the books didn't arrive, so I wanted to show you the PDF. And one of the things, of course, that's rather unusual is that you make a catalog after you do the show. And the reason for that was, one of them was that we really wanted to include a lot of the installation shots because we felt like that we had a very particular dense situation with the installation, but also it sort of gave us the idea to sort of like reflect back on the exhibition once it was done and sort of think like, how did this work? What things were successful? What were the things that were perhaps less successful? And as I said, this is the beginning of a series of exhibitions about different regions in the world. And we tried, for example, with this exhibition to activate or reach out also to the Latin American community. There's a big Mexican community in Detroit, and one of the things that we came to realize was that it was extremely difficult to bring people into the museum from that community, just simply because nobody had ever invited them to go to a museum. There was a big hesitance. It was sort of like seemingly understood that that was like something that was, you know, for a very particular strata of society, but not for that community. So we did a lot of workshops and outreach projects with the education department of the museum to really connect to that community as well, which was a really difficult task. And I think that's about it here in the, another element of this conversation that was of this book, which is really nice, is this conversation that we did with a group of younger curators coming from throughout Latin America, and actually one of the most successful elements in the book, really looking at, these are curators that are like about 10 or 15 years younger than I am, so like in the mid to late 20s, and really coming from a completely different point of view than how I approached Latin America as someone who has like lived in Europe or North America most of the time. I wish I could have some of the copies here, but as I told you, it's all stuck in customs. So yeah, just to give you a little bit of an overview of this exhibition, and gonna wrap it up here with this shot. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. There's the microphone, yeah.
Yes, hello. I would like to ask you a couple of questions. First, what was the point of having an exhibit with such a broad spectrum? Second, what was the criteria for choosing the actors, the artist? And third, what do you mean about Latin American identity?
Okay, so first question. This exhibition was co-curated with Pablo León de la Barra, who is a Mexican curator. You might know him. And we've known each other probably for like about 10 to 15 years, and sort of started out as young curators many, many years ago. And over the many years, we have often exchanged our research, artists that we've met, recommended studio visits. So it was sort of also a little bit a coming together of a certain dialogue that I've had with him. And when he came to New York, he made an exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum, which was called Under the Same Sun. And we talked a lot about like the difficulties of doing these exhibitions that are focused on regions, particularly in a museum like the Guggenheim. I think that he actually did a really good job when the exhibition was in New York. He included a lot of artists that were not previously in the collection of the Guggenheim, and they bought all the works that were there. So the starting point was very much our dialogue that we have had for a long time, and then also in specific this exhibition that he was doing there. The other thing was also that with the Cardis Foundation that is based in San Francisco, we've collected all this work, and we were very eager to finally do an exhibition with this. And so there was on the one hand this dialogue with Pablo, the show in New York, and our desire to finally show a lot of the work to a larger public. So the second question about what are the criteria? Often, actually, it's almost like the other way around. What are the things that you maybe don't want to look at? And one of the things was, of course, that we felt like it's perhaps not so interesting for audiences to see artists, again, that have been included in many exhibitions in New York or in Los Angeles or other places in the US. So a lot of the artists, almost all of them were shown for the very first time in the United States, especially the younger ones. So that was another sort of like thing that we were really thinking about. Also thinking about like a kind of diverse group of people, not only from like 3 or 4 countries where a lot of the artists come from or where there are particularly strong art scenes, but artists that sort of like have a wider spread. Now to the last question, which is obviously the most difficult one, Latin American identity. I mean, I don't know if you can really talk about one Latin American identity. So the idea was, of course, immediately this idea of the United States of Latin America, an identity that is made up of many different identities, many different ethnicities even. Of course, you think about the indigenous population, you think about the colonial population, you think about the slaves, particularly in the Caribbean, in Brazil. So, of course, there's multiple levels of that further complicate the entire thing. So it's not really like a statement to say like this, as I said in the beginning, this is what's Latin American identity is about, but I feel like all of the works, or many of them, sort of touch upon like what's Latin America's relationship to the United States. When you look, for example, at the Minerva Cuevas mural, there's this beautiful piece here by Filippo Arturo that is a work that is made out of brown and white sugar. And it's a work that deals with, as a Brazilian artist, with the black and the white, and it picks up on a very particular occurrence in the Amazon River, where it comes together with a river that's called Rio Negro and Rio Blanco, and you have almost that phenomenon going on, where there's the mixture of cultures or colors coming up. What's interesting here, you see this almost in its last stage. It's actually extremely refined at the beginning. There's white and brown, but they have people started walking over it. So it starts blurring more and more. And at the end of the exhibition, both the brown sugar and the white sugar was completely mixed up.
You did a really good job of answering that question, all three questions. You impressed me. Do you see a shift? You mentioned that you didn't include the more senior artists in your exhibition, which I would agree with. But do you see a shift in the way a younger generation is looking at things? It's a hard question, I know. I'm being
No, I mean, I guess that every young generation looks differently at things, you know. But one of the things I notice, not only with this show, but just looking at Latin American art, that maybe a previous generation that I knew, and that was maybe perhaps more accessible to me through exhibitions that I saw in Europe or North America, was there was a lot of political work that was really outspokenly political coming out of the 60s and 70s, and it was very much concerned with political questions. Like we saw this one piece here, for example, with the drawings about the assassinations. That type of work, I felt like you would have seen much more. Now, artists in Latin America, to me, do not necessarily have to make work about being Latin American anymore. You know, even, I don't know if it was ever really the case, but at least that was the work that people in Europe or in North America wanted to see. You know, and so there's another generation that doesn't necessarily concern itself with that, I would say. But you know, it's different in every country. Now, like, I'm answering this question, and then I'm sort of thinking, now, wait. Like, when you think about Brazil, formalism has been like so important there, for example, you know. But then you have artists like Silo Mireles, who's super political. So, you know, it's a little bit of many different things.
Hello. Well, I think books are very important in your work, but I would like you to tell me, how do you conceive the editorial process in general?
Well, yeah, it's true. I'd always like to make publications for my exhibitions, and this one, because of the complexity, I felt like that we needed a lot of different layers. You know, Pablo lives in Latin America. He is from Latin America, so we sort of like, I felt personally that was really important. I necessarily just on my own, doing a show that is so much involved with these type of questions of a particular region, I wouldn't have felt necessarily really comfortable with it. But then we also wanted to invite a younger generation of curators, people who sort of like are now at that point that I and Pablo were when we begin with our careers and when we met for the first time, and really give them also a voice within the project. And what is important is also that these are younger curators that in many cases have told us about some of the artists that are now in this exhibition. So it's sort of like also crediting them and you know, bringing them into the fold, and hopefully other sort of things can emerge out of that. We wanted to make this glossary just simply to add more information, and you know, some of these things are kind of critical, some are humorous in this glossary. So not to go too into this political direction, not being overly didactic, but also having fun with it and enjoying the process. But for every book, it's different. You know, it really like sort of merges out what is the exhibition and what else can you say or do you want to say. I mean, I think this was a show that needed or needs a little more material around it. But I always wonder, what is the afterlife of an exhibition? You know, once it's over, it's over. So the book is always a nice thing to remember an exhibition by, and that's why I always try to also have installation shots in the books.
You mentioned Under the Same Sun and at the beginning, and in Mexico this exhibition is important because it started a discussion about what mean Latin American if you see it from the United States, no? And what mean collect Latin American art, no, from United States, and both idea it's the same line in your exhibition, no?
Yeah.
Actually, but at the same time it's different because the Kaddish have a large process to collect and another kind of view of the what do you want to show about Latin American art, and this particular part we like to know about the political statement of your exhibition. If you compare with Under the Same Sun, what is the difference? What is the difference in the political statement? No, if you want to see.
Well, I know the process of that show at the Guggenheim because of my conversation with Pablo, and I said to him like, what is this title, Under the Same Sun? So there's sort of this idea of the sun in Latin America as a sunny place, but then I realized actually that the title wasn't an invention that he came up with. It was related to another piece that an artist made in the 70s. So there was sort of like a rationale for that convinced me, which many people do not know, and they just simply think this is like this catchy kind of cliche title. But there is actually an artwork that deals with that, like from 40 years ago. The show at the Guggenheim is part of a series that the museum is doing with art from different places over the world. I think the first one was about Southeast Asia. This was now Latin America, and they have just hired a curator who is doing a survey of the Middle East. So there will eventually be an exhibition with emerging art from the Middle East that then will enter the collection. And this is, I think, an interesting thing that they're putting these shows together to bring those works into the collection. And one thing that you notice when you saw Under the Same Sun is also that not necessarily always like the same old names. It's again different names. It's older artists. It's people that sort of like maybe been a little bit forgotten. And I would just simply for that already give the exhibition a lot of credit. I've read a few really sharp critiques towards that exhibition, and perhaps it wasn't a good idea to bring this exhibition to Latin America in that way, because it sort of had so many decisions were made based on the fact that it was in a big museum in New York to enter that collection, and those are all things that perhaps don't translate so well to the context here in Mexico. Yeah, I think so. I haven't seen it here yet. Maybe I will try to see it tomorrow. But I liked it a lot in New York. It was very subtly installed, and there were many nice relationships between the artists that I thought were very well articulated.
Your exhibition is going to itinerary?
Sorry?
The exhibition is going to another place?
No. No, it was just there in Detroit for these 4 months. We were thinking about touring it, but we started our efforts too late, so every museum that we contacted, they already had a full schedule. Just like silly problems of museum programming. Any other questions? Yeah, I want to get the book too. So I'm waiting for it.
Are they going to sell it?
Oh, yeah. It's published by Sternberg Press, and hopefully it will just be in the bookshops or on Amazon for sure. Online you will find it, yeah.
In Amazon it's available.
Sorry?
In Amazon it's available.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Thank you very much.